D-Class members were sent into SCP-589's containment center. There were 3 D-Class members in total. They stepped into the room, and there, sitting on a chair, was SCP-589. At this point in time, SCP-589's appearance was that of a classic China doll, with a flowery red dress and a big red bow on its head. All subjects recalled feeling a sense of calm and peace as soon as they laid eyes on the doll. They were immediately drawn to the object, and all stepped forward. But then, suddenly, Subject A lashed out at the other 2 individuals for fear that they would steal 589 from it. Subject B and Subject C also lashed out, fearing the other would hog 589 to themselves. A fight broke out, and by the time Foundation personnel rushed in, Subject A had a concussion, Subject B had 2 broken ribs, and Subject C had his eyeball gouged out. Meanwhile, 589 had not moved from its position on the chair. All individuals were removed from the room before SCP-589 could deal any more damage. Welcome back to SCP Exposed. Today, we bring you Keter Class Object SCP-589, aka the Doll. This object must be contained within a sealed, reinforced container that is welded shut. Under no circumstances is SCP-589 to be removed from its container, physically contacted, or even seen. The doll and its container must sit on a scale so that it may be continually weighed to confirm SCP-589's presence. The doll's containment cell may only be accessed by Level 4 personnel and must be guarded by at least 2 Level 4 security personnel with 24-hour surveillance. Under no circumstances is SCP-589 allowed to leave its containment cell. Any personnel attempting unauthorized entry or removal of the doll will be terminated on the spot. Should containment be breached, then the entire sector SCP-589 is held in must be immediately purged via demolition charges or incendiary devices. Any personnel assigned to the sector that manage to escape must be questioned and then immediately detained for psychological screening. If any personnel failed to escape, then that is the price that must be paid to ensure SCP-589's containment. In the event that SCP-589 must be handled without the protection of the container, the only personnel authorized to handle the doll must be cleared by Foundation psychologists and must have a psionic resistance index of 30 or higher. Once their task is complete, all personnel that have handled SCP-589 must submit to a mandatory psychological screening. SCP-589 is a stuffed animal or figure that is able to change its appearance based on the subjective desires of the first person to come in contact with it. SCP-589 has the ability to create a calming, soothing sensation within anybody who sees or comes into physical contact with it. This ability appears to be mimetic, as it is able to spread via copies of itself as well as pictures depicting its likeness. It is noted that in 1982, the iconic Mr. Sammy Tammy figure took the toy world by storm, despite no records or writings of it having existed beforehand. However, suddenly Mr. Sammy Tammy toys began production all across the world, without any apparent source. Foundation researchers theorized the Mr. Sammy Tammy toy was a byproduct of SCP-589. The calming effect SCP-589 imparts is not unlike the use of narcotics, as it stimulates the areas of the brain that are responsible for feelings of relief and euphoria, and encourages the production of chemicals and hormones that reduce stress. However, this effect quickly becomes addictive, with infected individuals becoming completely dependent on SCP-589 after extended exposure. Once addicted, an individual's interaction with SCP-589 or any of its copies borders on complete obsession, and they are compelled to create more copies of the object and attempt to spread them. However, what makes SCP-589 dangerous are its after effects. After a certain period of time, 589 will immediately vanish. 589, any of its physical copies, and all versions of it in printed and electronic media will completely disappear. This sudden and massive disappearance of 589 results in catastrophic consequences for those infected by 589. Without the object there to keep them passive and calm, infected individuals will immediately suffer a variety of severe withdrawal symptoms, including, but not limited to, manic depression, psychosis, heightened aggression, uncontrollable despair, dementia, mania, paranoia, and various other behavioral disorders. It is not known how or why SCP-589 does this, though there is speculation that 589 feeds off of the mental anguish it causes to those completely obsessed with it. Once the process is complete, SCP-589 will reappear in another random location and repeat the cycle. An example of such a case was in the small rural town of Harrisburg, Texas. It was 1997, and the town possessed a population of only 300 people. Reports sprung up that a new toy had been sold in the only toy store in town. It was described as a brown teddy bear with cute black eyes, a blue ribbon, and soft fur. Every kid in town bought the toy, and every household in Harrisburg had the famed brown teddy bear. Everyone loved the toy, and eventually they became obsessed with it. Then, suddenly, in the summer of 1997, all copies of the brown teddy bear in Harrisburg disappeared, just like that. There was no evidence of its existence whatsoever. Photos that once contained the teddy bear were now empty. Videos were somehow deleted from cameras. Drawings of the teddy bear by children were blank and erased. However, the people still remembered the teddy bear they had come to love with all their heart, and they could not understand why it had disappeared so suddenly. Tensions raised. People were frantic as they searched for the teddy bear. Some tried to make copies of it, but to no avail. In the end, the town grew mad and massive riots broke out. By the end of the summer, the entire population of 300 people had died due to mass murder and violence. When outside Foundation agents arrived at the scene, there was nothing left but the bodies of the slaughtered locals. Next, a new toy seemed to have sprung up in a small island off the coast of New Zealand. This time in the form of a dinosaur toy. The same thing happened. People became obsessed with it, both children and adults. And then suddenly, the dinosaur toy disappeared off the face of the earth. Riots sprung up, massacres occurred, people went insane, and many people ended up dead or injured due to acts of violence. Dr. Jones, thankfully, was able to link these seemingly random tragedies that occurred in places all over the world. He was able to narrow it down to the appearance of a toy of some sort, and the next time a toy appeared suddenly in a town somewhere, Dr. Jones dispatched agents to locate and retrieve the object. Using the data Dr. Jones provided, the Foundation managed to intercept and contain SCP-589. Though several personnel had to undergo rigorous psychological treatment to counter the effects of 589. Currently, SCP-589 has not attempted to leave its containment area, which has led researchers to hypothesize that the object follows a very specific life cycle pattern. After various experiments on test groups consisting of D-Class personnel, SCP-589 appears to be solely targeted at individuals with severe insecurities, or those suffering from high amounts of stress. Infection rates on subjects whose psychological profile suggested that they were susceptible to high amounts of stress or low self-esteem showed a 90% infection rate, while subjects with little to no stress and high self-esteem only suffered from a 12% infection rate. This confirms Dr. Jones's initial hypothesis that SCP-589 targets areas with high numbers of people that are easy for it to infect. It is notable that Harrisburg, the town that SCP-589 had visited in 1997, possessed abnormally high depression rates. Similarly, in the small island off New Zealand, anxiety levels were high due to the poor economy that existed there. It is a real possibility that SCP-589 may in fact be a sentient creature, rather than an inanimate object. Study of SCP-589's movement patterns, correlated with data about its infection pattern, suggests that SCP-589 deliberately controls where it appears at the beginning of every cycle. However, more data and experiments are needed in order to confirm this. This cannot be achieved, unfortunately, due to Event 589-03. In August of 2005, numerous experiments were conducted involving D-Class personnel and SCP-589. The D-Class members were asked to spend 3 hours every day playing with SCP-589 and its copies, which were contained at Site-21. This continued for a period of 3 weeks. Unknown to higher authorities, SCP-589 had been implementing its obsession effects into all personnel who were stationed at Site-21, totaling 63 people. On the 28th of August 2005, a breach of containment occurred, whereby all 63 staff members of Site-21 attempted to extract SCP-589 out of its holding facility. They managed to make it out of Site-21 but were immediately stopped by Task Force Zero before they could enter the public world. Not without casualty, however. 18 members of Task Force Zero were killed during the attempted breach, all at the hands of Foundation employees. It is clear that SCP-589's mind-numbing effects are so strong that it can bring innocent people to commit murder. All 63 staff members were imprisoned and put under severe analysis. SCP-589 was returned to its holding facility with extra security measures put in place. General 05-LF has ordered that under no circumstances can any individual at any time come into contact with SCP-589. There have been debates over whether the doll should be terminated, namely by way of incineration, but many researchers have gone against this proposition due to the possibility that SCP-589 may just reappear in a different form somewhere else on Earth. As it is known, the doll is capable of this. Some Foundation members theorize that SCP-589 is an object sent here by a parallel dimension to inflict terror and pain, although this theory is based on no real evidence. Others theorize SCP-589 is a sentient creature, merely waiting for its time to strike and send the world into a complete catastrophe, consisting of insane people and doom. Once again, this theory is based on no real evidence. What do you think of that SCP case? Comment your thoughts down below and make sure to subscribe and give this video a huge thumbs up. Hit that notification bell too so you don't miss out on any more creepy SCP cases. I wasn't prepared when I first came across SCP-099. I was a level 6 staff member of the SCP Foundation. I was more of a janitor, nothing more, but I had seen things. Things that some of you could never even begin to dream of. Things that don't make sense. Things that make me question my own existence. But first, please be sure to give this video a huge thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Also, make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these creepy SCP accounts. It was a Tuesday night. I remember that because Tuesday nights are when I work the night shift. My job was to clean up the leftovers of experiments. Sometimes experiments didn't go too well. Sometimes the objects or things that they experimented on were terminated, and it was up to level 6 staff members to clean up the mess. That's why we were given the nickname the janitors. We didn't actually carry a mop and bucket around with us, but we may as well have. Sometimes the mess they left behind was crazy. One time, I was called to clean up room 22AX on the 2nd floor sector. When I entered the room, it looked like the walls had been painted red. Turns out, it was just blood. Another time, I had to go in and remove the remains of something that looked like a cross between a blobfish and a ladder. Yep, you heard me correctly. I told you, this place contains some crazy stuff. Anyway, back to Tuesday night. I was alone on my shift, and I walked up to the front desk where I would be given my assignment for the night. The man sitting behind the desk glanced at me and handed over a sheet. I read the list and saw only 3 rooms listed. I breathed a sigh of relief. The other night, I had been given 10 rooms. It had taken me all night just to get them cleaned up. At least tonight's shift would go by quickly. I headed over to the elevator, punched in the floor numbers, and felt the elevator lower deeper into the ground. This place is big, and when I say big, I mean big. I don't even know how far or deep the SCP Foundation stretches, and I worked there for 10 years. But let me tell you that it easily surpasses a few miles. The elevator doors opened and the hallway appeared before me. Only a few lights were on, and I was feeling pretty spooked out. I started walking. I spotted a few scientists and doctors through the glass windows and waved over to them, but they didn't wave back. They were level 2 staff members. I guess they thought I was on too low of a level to be acknowledged. I walked up and spotted room 22AX. Now, usually the list of rooms I received had a bunch of notes written alongside it, just to give me a heads up on what may be inside. Sometimes the SCP is still active, and there are certain rules I must abide by if I want to stay alive. But for some unknown reason, I never looked at those notes for room 22AX. I don't know why, but I just didn't, and that is a decision that I will regret for the rest of my life. I entered the room and I was immediately met by the painting. It looked like an ordinary painting, probably from the Surrealist era. The painting depicted a simple still life. A table with a glass bottle, a plate, cutlery, and a single eye staring back at me. That eye gave me the heebie-jeebies. It wasn't a great painting. Not to my taste exactly, but I just couldn't stop staring at it. I stared and stared at it, and I could think of nothing else. I didn't know it at the time, but this painting was SCP-099. I was still in the doorway of the room. I closed the door behind me and stepped closer to the painting. On the floor at my feet, a red line had been drawn around 4 meters away from the painting. I stepped over the line and walked closer to the painting, all the while my eyes still glued to it like a moth to a flame. Later, they would tell me I stared at that painting for 8 hours straight. 8 hours! At the time, it felt like only a few minutes. Suddenly, the door opened and a group of scientists poured in. They grabbed me and dragged me from the room. But that's when I glanced around and I started seeing eyes everywhere. Eyeballs were on the roof, the walls, the floor, in the back of the heads of the people around me, on their clothes, on their shoes. Eyes everywhere. I started to scream. They're looking at me. They're all looking at me. Stop it, stop it. The people grabbed me and brought me to a separate room where they forced me into a chair and tied my limbs down. I screamed again and the eyes kept following me. Now everyone in the room was staring at me, really staring at me, and I yelled at them again. Stop staring at me! But then, suddenly, I felt a pain in my left arm, and I saw that they had injected me with a syringe. I stared at the syringe and noticed that there was an eye on its cylinder, and the eye was staring at me too. Why is that syringe staring at me? I mumbled, and then I blacked out. Ever since that day, I have become a slave to SCP-099's power. I discovered that I had been subjected to its mimetic properties, which have been noted to have extreme effects on those who view it. Those who have viewed SCP-099 for too long or from too close of a distance become subject to the delusion that any being or depiction of a being with eyes is staring at them. In extreme cases, subjects report that inanimate objects are making eye contact. I later found out that SCP-099 was painted by surrealist painter René Magritte in 1935. It is noted that the mimetic properties it possesses was intentional, although the effect it has on viewers was not. Magritte was still alive when SCP-099 was discovered. The Foundation placed heavy surveillance on Magritte until his death, and they also investigated his other works. Although none of his other paintings were found with the same mimetic properties as SCP-099. If I had read the notes on that sheet, I would have seen a warning not to step over that red line and not to look at the painting whatsoever. But I didn't read those notes, and I am now scarred for life. My condition means that I cannot stay in crowded places. It terrifies me to the bones. I can just feel everyone staring at me, even if their heads are turned in the opposite direction. It's horrific. It's been a year since the incident. I have since been relieved from my job at the SCP Foundation. They didn't silence me, if you know what I mean, which is a relief. I suppose they believe I'm too traumatized to ever spread word of what I've seen. Just telling you this makes my mind tingle with fear. I stay at home most of the time. I have no friends. I basically have no life. The SCP Foundation has offered me a monthly charity pay as compensation for my issues, but it doesn't make up for what happened. I suppose it's mostly my own fault for not reading the notes, but seriously, a painting as dangerous as that should be better contained. I tried going out, just once. I wrapped a cloak around me to cover my peripheral vision, and I headed out to the grocery store. I thought maybe if I was careful and I didn't look at anybody or anything, I'd be okay. But it didn't work. Once I got to the store, I had to glance up, and that's when I saw the eye on the door. It stared at me with red pupils, and it didn't blink. I turned around and started screaming with fear, and I think someone came over to help me, but when I looked at them, they were staring at me with a deathly glare. I screamed again, shoved the person aside, and bolted home. Sometimes I can feel the eyes of inanimate objects staring too. I wake up at night screaming because I can see an eye on the ceiling, and it's staring at me as I sleep. I rarely get enough sleep these days. Some therapists from the SCP Foundation recommended that I reach out to the other victims of SCP-099. Of course, the SCP Foundation has all of their information stored in their files. I did try reaching out. There was a woman. I won't give her real name out of respect for her privacy, so let's call her Rachel. She lived nearby, and I contacted her via email and asked if she'd like to meet. She seemed hesitant, but she agreed. I thought that it would be great if I could finally talk to someone who felt the same way that I felt. It was terrible feeling so alone. The next day, I offered to walk over to Rachel's apartment. It was tough, and I nearly got run over a few times because I was mostly walking with my eyes closed. But eventually, I made it to her door. She opened it up, and then we both screamed. I suppose she must have been seeing the same thing as me. Her face was nothing but one eye. No lips, no nose, just an eye, and it terrified me. She screamed too as she stared at me, and then we both turned on our heels and took off. Me back home, her back into her apartment. I didn't try to contact anyone again after that. I don't know how I can go on. Every day is just so hard. I don't know how long I have left, but I guess I'm just telling you this as a warning. Next time, read the notes. Oh yeah, and if you see a painting that fits SCP-099's description, don't look at it too long. Trust me, you'll regret it. Knowledge is power. But in the case of SCP-606, too much knowledge can mean death. Welcome back to SCP Exposed. Today, we bring you Euclid-class object SCP-606, also known as The Teacher. There have been requests made by Foundation personnel to raise 606's class to level Keter due to the potential threat it poses. However, this change in classification is still undergoing review. SCP-606 appears as a spherical mass of light of alternating size and intensity. Most commonly, it is approximately 85 centimeters in diameter and emits 220 candelas of luminosity, but has been observed to grow to up to 10 meters in diameter and emit over 100,000 candelas. The entity has also been observed to shrink to 4 centimeters in diameter, emitting less than 0.5 candela. Despite its ability to emit large amounts of light, SCP-606 emits no heat. It does not appear to be composed of any form of matter and is able to pass through material barriers effortlessly. Because of its ability to pass through any form of matter, researchers theorize that SCP-606 is currently contained in its chamber of its own free will. Why it remains here exactly is uncertain. When asked, SCP-606 claims that it wishes to see what may occur. What this means exactly is also uncertain. It is presently theorized that SCP-606 is an entity composed purely of knowledge or information. Furthermore, SCP-606 appears to derive sustenance from information, growing in both size and luminosity when provided with sources of information, as well as shrinking when it is deprived of information. It is capable of feeding off a large number of different sources, including digital devices, books, magnetic tape, and living beings, which simply involves SCP-606 surrounding the object. This process does not appear to affect its sources in any way. Digital media stored on flash drives are used in the maintenance of SCP-606 by the Foundation. So the specific details as well as approximate size of the information provided to the entity may be easily recorded. SCP-606 is sapient, apparently self-aware of all knowledge it has gained over its existence, and capable of intelligent communication. It accomplishes this by producing pure sine wave tones through an unknown mechanism. The Foundation has thus formulated a tone-based language system to communicate with the entity, a language which all personnel of Level 2 or above assigned to SCP-606 are required to learn. Through communication with the entity, the Foundation has learned that SCP-606 appears to hold a preference for classical literature, and the given amount has been observed to keep the entity at its normal size and luminosity. Despite the vast information it presumably contains, SCP-606 refuses to divulge this information in any interviews, unless it can enlighten individuals. However, O5 Command has forbidden anyone from accepting the entity's invitation to enlightenment due to past tragedies that have taken place as a result. If another sapient individual enters SCP-606's containment cell, it will attempt to enlighten them. This involves SCP-606 moving to surround the being's head. This results in generalized tonic-clonic epileptic seizures for a period of 30 seconds to 5 minutes, after which the individual lapses into a coma, followed by death. EEG monitoring of affected individuals during this process has shown a massive increase in activity of all brainwaves, particularly gamma and beta type waves. It is presently theorized that this is the result of SCP-606 attempting to transfer all the information it has gathered to the individual's brain through an unknown process, despite the normal human brain being unable to sustain the stress of such a procedure. It is again uncertain whether these tragedies have arisen out of an accidental action on the entity's part, or whether these deaths are actually purposeful, and leads Foundation personnel to fear if SCP-606 is actually a malevolent entity. If so, This would require an immediate change in classification of the entity to Keter, as currently the Foundation possesses no effective countermeasurement to a possible breach by SCP-606. SCP-606 is currently housed of its own will in an unfurnished 20 meter by 25 meter by 8 meter cell at Site-12, the entrance to which is sealed by two 25 centimeter steel blast doors on either side of an airlock. No personnel are to enter the entity's containment cell except under controlled testing circumstances or with authorization from a staff member of Level 4 clearance or higher. Standard positive action defenses, explosive, chemical, biological, and memetic, are to be in place at all times, according to standard operating procedure. Through use of a mobile, remotely operated device, SCP-606 is to be provided with an ordinary USB flash storage device containing no less than 2 megabytes of data every 12 hours. The data contained on the device is to be left to the discretion of SCP-606's supervisor, but text from classic literature or encyclopedias, movie clips, or audio files of historical speeches are ideal. In an emergency situation, this may be substituted with data in any form, such as print, compact discs, or videotapes. A careful record of all data provided to the entity must be kept. No material pertaining to the Foundation or other anomalous objects should be provided to SCP-606 under any circumstances, as this may be used against the Foundation in future as a form of blackmail. SCP-606 was first discovered in France in 1989. Following the sudden disappearance of 28 individuals in a small town. Once the entity was located, hidden in the basement of an abandoned cabin, personnel were able to lure the entity into a vehicle and transport it to its current holding facility at Site-12 by offering the entity D-Class members to enlighten. Results of past interviews with SCP-606 have been mixed. Although it has previously been willing to answer some basic questions about itself and its history, any more in-depth questioning on the knowledge it possesses inevitably results in a request by SCP-606 to enlighten the interviewer and a refusal to answer further questions. Requests have been made to the entity to refrain from attempting to enlighten anyone without permission. These requests have been partially complied with by the entity, as SCP-606 no longer tries to enlighten every individual it comes in contact with. But it has still sporadically tried to perform the process without prompting. For this reason, access to the entity's cell is restricted. The following recording is an interview that was conducted with the entity in June of 2019. Dr. Harold sat at a comms unit which was connected to a set of speakers in SCP-606's chamber, while the creature's replies were then recorded and translated into English. The entity also appears to understand the English language.
Can you understand me?
Yes.
How did you learn to do this?
I listen.
Could you tell us what you are?
I am the teacher.
Could you be more specific?
I am the teacher. I am a purveyor of knowledge. Enter this chamber, and I shall enlighten you.
I do not wish to do that at the moment. How do you enlighten people?
I teach them.
Are you aware that this causes your students to die?
I do not call it death. It is the consequence of being inadequate.
What do you teach?
I teach all that I have learned.
Do you know who I am?
You are that which calls itself a human. Your fellows refer to you as Doctor.
Do you know what a doctor is?
It is your word for one who has been taught and teaches, in your own fashion, at least.
Can you teach me through talking to me?
I wish to enlighten you. If you do not wish to be enlightened, I have no use for you.
At this point, SCP-606 refused to answer any more of Dr. Harold's questions and refused to communicate for several days afterwards. On the 8th of June 2019, Dr. Harold's dead body was found in his quarters. The cause of death is unknown. Personnel checked on SCP-606's security footage in the time between its interview with Dr. Harold and Dr. Harold's death, but it appears to not have moved at all during that period. An investigation into the doctor's death is currently underway and remains unsolved. So, what did you think of that SCP case? Comment your thoughts down below and be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Don't forget to click the notification bell too, so you don't miss out on any SCP stories. Subject A entered the elevator. The special unit sent from the Foundation waited in the hallway, approximately 10 meters away. They watched as the elevator doors closed and Subject A disappeared from sight. The special unit waited 84 seconds, as requested by HQ, and then they proceeded to select the elevator button again. The machine hummed as the elevator rose, and then the doors opened to reveal nothing but empty air. Subject A had disappeared. Subject A was never found again. Welcome back to SCP Exposed. Today, we're bringing you Euclid Class Object SCP-636, also known as the Elevator to Nowhere. SCP-636 is a maintenance elevator at a hotel. The name of this hotel will hereby remain disclosed. The hotel, which will be referred to as Hotel X, has been officially condemned for supposed mold contamination to prevent further mishaps with SCP-636. Hotel X has been fenced off to prevent unwanted intrusion, and staff members have been let off and moved to a separate hotel chain. A minimum of 2 armed undercover guards are to be posted at ground level, and any unauthorized individuals attempting to enter the building must be detained and questioned. Any experimentation on SCP-636 must only be performed with prior permission from at least 2 Level 3 personnel. Unlike the other elevators in the building, SCP-636 contains a magnetic card reader, which when used with a specific card key will cause the elevator to move to a 3rd sub-basement beneath the building. According to the building plan, there are only 2 sub-basements beneath the building, and the owner of the property was not even aware of an elevator with magnetic card access. Whenever any individual attempts to access this floor via SCP-636, the elevator appears to work normally. However, upon reaching the seemingly non-existent floor, all contents of the elevator, including any personnel or remote monitoring equipment, will disappear. The Foundation conducted an exploration of the elevator shaft itself, but this has yielded no useful information. While the shaft does extend to a 3rd sub-basement level, there are only blank walls at that depth, and video cameras placed within the shaft have shown no unusual activity where the elevator reaches the bottom. SCP-636 was first discovered by the Foundation on the 20th of October 2005. The elevator was brought to the Foundation's attention following the disappearance of 2 elevator mechanics during routine maintenance of the building's elevator systems. A 2-man initial exploration team consisting of Agent Hans and Agent Waller was sent into SCP-636 and subsequently lost, after which the site was placed on lockdown and the owner and all witnesses given Class A amnestics. Current containment procedures were put into effect shortly afterward. Additionally, SCP-636 has been reported to move down to the Level 3 subbasement on its own accord, even if it is not carrying any passengers. On these random trips down, SCP-636 sometimes returns to ground level with some anomalous objects. On the 18th of February 2006, SCP-636 was called to the bottom floor for approximately 6 minutes before returning to the ground floor. Upon its return, the fully disassembled parts of 2 helmet-mounted video cameras were found on the floor of the elevator car. Analysis of the components confirmed that they belonged to the members of the initial exploration team. Memory cards and recording media of the cameras were blank. It is noted that some traces of the team members' blood were found on the disassembled camera parts. On the 8th of March 2006, SCP-636 was called for approximately 2 minutes before returning to the ground floor. According to the testimony of the armed guards stationed at the ground floor, the elevator door opened to reveal hundreds of human eyeballs lining the walls of the elevator car. The eyeballs tracked them for several seconds before the doors closed and the elevator was recalled to the bottom floor again. Elevator car was found empty afterward. On the 11th of March 2006, SCP-636 returned after 4 minutes and 17 seconds, and contained approximately 11 kilograms of shredded Egyptian cotton fabric soaked with blood. Analysis of the blood samples are inconclusive, as recovered DNA does not seem to match that of any known terrestrial animal. On the 15th of July 2007, SCP-636 returned after 8 minutes and 42 seconds. Upon opening, a naked and emaciated male, later identified as Agent Hans of the initial exploration team, began pounding on the buttons and screaming that he had to go back. Agent Hans managed to disarm and kill one armed guard and injure the other before returning back into SCP-636 and disappearing. At this point, it was unknown precisely what the Level 3 sub-basement realm contained. Agent Hans' reaction seemed to suggest it is not a harmful realm, although his physical condition and behavior could suggest a loss of sanity. It is thus forbidden for any personnel to enter SCP-636 without permission. For some time, there was no further activity regarding SCP-636. It continued to be dormant for a period of 12 years, that is, until recent. On the 19th of September 2019, the elevator doors moved to the Level 3 sub-basement on its own accord. Prior to this time, movement within SCP-636 had solely been instigated by Foundation personnel and experimentation. Guards were shocked by this sudden movement and were told to stand by and be prepared for whatever may reappear upon the elevator's return to ground level. SCP-636 lowered to the bottom level for approximately 2 hours and 48 minutes, a much longer period than previously recorded. Upon return to ground level, the elevator doors opened to reveal a man dressed in unusual attire. It is noted that Agent Dixon, a former comrade of both Agent Hans and Agent Waller, was on security duty that day. The man stood in the elevator doors and stared out at the guards. The guards pointed their weapons at the man and were told to wait. The man was dressed in a red robe, which covered him from the collar to his feet. His hands were folded behind his back, and he wore a golden necklace around his neck that had a symbol of an eye on its chain. Security guards present at the scene recall feeling a flash of pain in their heads whenever they glanced at the eye necklace. The man was bald, and upon his forehead there was also a tattoo of an eye. The Foundation members claimed that whenever they looked at this eye tattoo, they did not experience a flash of pain as they did with the necklace, but rather a sense of ease that made them feel relaxed. The man stood there for several minutes in pure silence. Then, he stepped out of the elevator and moved forward. It is noted the elevator doors did not close. The man was asked by the security personnel to introduce himself. The man responded, claiming he was
here to save them.
As soon as the man spoke, Agent Dixon suddenly cried out in surprise. He recognized that voice as none other than Agent Waller, the man who had disappeared on the initial SCP-636 exploration mission all those years ago.
Waller, is that really you?
Agent Dixon called out. Agent Waller looked at Agent Dixon and did not seem to recognize him.
I am here to save you,
he said instead. Agent Dixon moved out from the protective barriers guarding him from SCP-636 and approached Agent Waller.
It's been forever. Do you remember me? It's me, Dixon.
The eye knows all. The rain will come. The deal will show,
said Agent Waller. Agent Dixon halted in his step. He was being told by personnel back at Foundation HQ to ask Agent Waller as many questions as possible.
Is it all right if I ask you a few questions?
Dixon asked. Agent Waller didn't reply. Dixon cleared his throat and proceeded to ask the questions being relayed to him through his earpiece.
Where did you come from?
I come from the other side. Nothing your weak mind can understand.
Okay. Why are you here?
To give you a warning. The time will come when otherworldly beings will arrive, and you must make a choice. Do not listen to O5KK. He will doom you all.
O5KK?
Yes.
It is noted that O5KK is currently in one of the highest positions at the Foundation.
Where is Agent Hans?
Asked Dixon.
I do not know who this is you speak of.
Our friend, Waller. Hans? Surely you remember.
Dixon was asked to calm down and keep his emotions under control via comms.
Can you elaborate on these otherworldly beings? What do they look like? Are they going to attack us?
The man you refer to as SCP-099 will know the answers to your questions.
SCP-990?
It is noted that Dixon was not aware of who SCP-990 was at the time. For those of you who are also unaware, SCP-990 is a man who has visited the dreams of Foundation personnel, offering advice and warnings of future tragedies. Dixon was asked to urge Agent Waller to join him and return to the Foundation for further analysis.
Waller, it's time you come home. Let's go. Come on. Everyone's missed you so much.
Agent Waller, or rather, the man formerly known as Agent Waller, shook his head.
Waller is gone.
What do you mean?
I must bid farewell. Take heed of the eye's warnings.
The man then turned around and re-entered the elevator. Personnel advised security guards to refrain from attacking or attempting to capture the man, due to the lack of knowledge of the man's physical capabilities. The doors closed once again, and SCP-636 returned to the bottom level. When the elevator rose back to ground level 15 seconds later, it was empty. It is unknown what happened to Agent Waller. Security camera footage of the ordeal suggests it is indeed Agent Waller, as facial recognition has matched him to the man in the elevator. But it appears clear that Waller's mind has been brainwashed or tampered with. After the event, all security guards present claimed to have dreams of eyes and mysterious figures in red robes and woke up in sweats. This continued for a week, then the dreams disappeared. SCP-636 is still under containment. For now, Foundation personnel can only wait for a reappearance of the former Agent Waller, or another individual that can perhaps shed light on these supposedly dangerous otherworldly beings. SCP-990 is also currently attempting to be contacted by personnel to ask about SCP-636's warnings. What do you think of that SCP case? Comment your thoughts below and be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Don't forget to click the notification bell too so you don't miss out on any SCP stories.